Welcome back. All right, let's start setting up our SmartBrain project so it works on our machines. Something that we're going to use for the next couple of sections to actually add new features to it and do some really, really neat things with some modern tools that really improve our app. The first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to pretend this is my first day on the job. I have the SmartBrain project and the SmartBrain API. And Bruno and the team has just told us that there's a client application, a server, which is this one, and that we also need to set up the database because this server needs to speak to the database where all the users are and where we store the hashed passwords because users can log in and register to our app. Let's get to it. The very first thing I'm going to do is it's always good practice to, instead of just cloning the original repo, to just fork it. Now, in my case, because this is on my repo, I'm going to just clone it for now, but I do recommend that you fork your projects and you make your pull requests from those forked projects. But for now, I'm going to just clone the SmartBrain app to get us started. So I'm going to open up my terminal. And in here, let's make this a little bit bigger. In here, I'm just going to git clone our new repo. And while that's running, let's go to the API and do the same thing. Just clone this repo and git clone. All right, we can minimize this window for now and just have our two folders up here. So now, let's make this even bigger. Now what we want to do, actually, because we have two things, we might want to have two terminal windows here. So I'm going to add a new window. There you go. Again, make it a little bit bigger so we can all see. And I'm going to have one for my server, one for my client-side app. The very first thing I'm going to do, let's clear this a bit. I'm going to clear this as well. And I'm going to say that this is going to be the client-side app, the SmartBrain, and this is going to be the server that the client-side app uses. So this is going to be cd into SmartBrain API. All right. Now, usually on GitHub, there's good documentation by the team of how to install and do everything to set it up. We can just start off with doing that. And most likely, we're going to have to do npm install because we have a package.json file usually with all our npm packages. But before we do that, let me just open up Sublime. And I'm going to put these two windows together just to make my life easier. Perfect. So now I have my server that is right over here. I can just pretend this is its own machine and then do the same thing for my client-side app. Again, just putting these two together just to organize my screen so I know that these two are completely separate. And before I actually even run npm install, I like looking at the package.json file. That's usually is going to tell you the commands that your project has, what kind of dependencies we use, what kind of dev dependencies we use. And just by looking at this, I can Google perhaps npm and see, this is what Nomon does. This is what PG does. PG is Postgres, so they must be using this database. And Express, okay, they're using the Express server probably. They're using something called Clarify. I wonder what that is. And then, okay, they're using bcrypt Node.js to probably hash their passwords. So I already have an idea what the app uses as tools. Let's install those because for an app to work, we obviously need to install all these packages. And you'll see that the Node modules folder is going to appear. And do the same thing for the client-side app. I'm going to npm install. And again, going to package.json, I see, oh yeah, this is a React project. They're using React scripts, so that's definitely a create React app. That's great. And these are all the commands that I can use. It looks like npm start is what I want to use for the front end. And then the back end, I see that there's only one script, which is npm start. So before I even do anything, I can just run npm start and see if all of this works, which it does. The app is running. Okay, that's great. And let's run npm start here as well. And because we already have the server running on port 3000, we just hit yes, so we get a different port. And without looking at a single line of code, all right, I have everything set up and working, or it seems like it. All right, so it looks like it's working right now. Let's just try and create an account. We'll say hey at, or the name is hey@gmail.com, and we'll say that the password is hey. Register, I can register. If I open up the console, all right, I see that there's a 400 bad request at the register endpoint. If I go back to my terminal, all right, I get an error on the server. I get a connects warning, connection error, connection ended unexpectedly. Okay, so it looks like there's some sort of a connection error without looking at any code. And, well, it looks like I can't really register. And we know that in order to have any form of sign-in or users, we need a database to remember things for us, such as usernames, passwords, profile information, all those things. All right, and we know this. I mean, Bruno told us that there is a client app, a server, and a database. So it looks like we need to set up our database now so that we have this connection. And because I'm not getting any errors on the front end, and front end is usually very easy to set up, I can go back and go through the dependencies and see what they're using. And I see that they're using PG, which is Postgres, and most likely the database connection and setup happens at one of the main files, such as server.js. So I'd go here probably first, and right away I see that, all right, it looks like DB database is using this connects package. And connects, let's say I don't know what it is, I'll just go over here and say connects npm, see what kind of results I get. All right, batteries included, multi-dialect. Ooh, that's a query builder for Node.js and browser. All right, so it looks like we're using it for SQL. If we go to GitHub, maybe they'll give us better description. Looks like they have a website, so let's go check that out. And oh yeah, connects, again, batteries included, SQL builder. And it looks like we're able to create SQL statements, really nice, clean SQL statements by using this. If I go over here to, let's say, the query builder, let's say that we want to do a select method. All right, so it looks like we're using connects.select, title, author, year from the books database. And the output is select statement that gives us this. All right, awesome. So maybe you knew what connects was, maybe you didn't. But with any project, I take a look at these and say, oh, okay, so this is what they're using it for. That makes sense that we're creating a database and using connects to connect to the Postgres database. And oh, looks like there's a connection here. And it looks like this is localhost. By the way, this 127.0.0.1 is the same thing as localhost. If I change this to localhost, it's going to be the same thing. Saw a funny share once, I think I've said this before, where it said there's no place like 127.0.0.1, which means localhost. So home, there's no place like home. I thought that was funny. Anyway, we also see that there's a SmartBrain database. All right. And the user is Ana Goya, which I created, but we'll see if we even need that. So looking at this, we need to connect to a database. And in development, because you're working on your own computer, you need to connect to a database that's on your computer. Or maybe they have a testing database that we can connect to, but Bruno didn't mention anything, so it looks like we have to set up the database ourselves. And again, if databases are new to you, then I do recommend you check out my other course. For now, we can start off a Postgres database and create the SmartBrain app database inside of it. On a Mac, this is different for every machine. You can use something called a GUI, or graphical user interface, to actually create these tables for you, just because it's a little bit easier than using the terminal. So I have something called pSQL. I'll link to sources that have GUIs for Windows and Linux and other sources, but pSQL is free and really, really nice for Mac. Let me show you. Again, it allows us to use Postgres and have a nice graphical user interface. So let's go back to our database, and all right, it looks like here we can just try and connect to localhost, which is what we want, and to the SmartBrain database. So let's connect here. All right, it says error, could not connect to server, connection refused. Is the server running on host, localhost, and this port number? Well, probably not. I mean, without you actually having to start a database server, you're not going to have this running. So the first thing you need to do is say, hey, run a Postgres server on my computer. Again, there's nothing that we've done to create a database, have we? All we need to do is open up the terminal. Let's add a new one. Let's make it a little bit bigger. And we're going to say brew. And this is something that I can use. Brew is homebrew for Mac. And by using this command on a Mac, I can start or stop Postgres. Whoops, if I can type. This is because I already have Postgres installed. Again, I'll leave resources for you to do the same if you haven't already done so from my previous course. So brew services start Postgres. All right, successfully started Postgres. Now, if we go back and we've started the server and I try and connect to the SmartBrain database, which I secretly already created, all right, looks like I'm connected to the database. There's two tables here. There's a login table that has IDs, the hash version of the password, and the emails. So we can use this to log in, okay? And then we have the users. We have name, email, entries, joined. And just by looking at the database, I kind of have an idea of what information the SmartBrain app needs. And it looks like it just has user information. Now, I have this already created, but what if we didn't have this already? What if we have a different database? So let's close this actually and try again. I'm going to open pSQL again. And this time around, let's connect to a database called SmartBrain 1. If I connect, database SmartBrain 1 does not exist. So how did I create that SmartBrain database? Again, depending on the system that your Postgres is running in. For Mac, I can do the create DB and just give it the name, whatever name I want. And again, this comes with a brew installed version of Postgres. Again, I'll leave links to that so you can do it if you don't have Postgres already on your computer. So I'm going to say create database SmartBrain 1. If I now go back and try to connect, look at that. We can connect and we're inside of the database, but you see that we have no tables. We create tables by going into the query. And in here, I actually have a query history, so I'm just going to write it for you. I can create the users table, and this is just simple SQL commands. And we'll go over this a little bit more. when we actually work with Docker, but we're creating an ID with a serial primary key. That is, it's going to go in order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have a name that limits to variable characters of 100. Email that needs to be unique and not null. And it also needs to be in text type. And entries that begin with a default of 0. And joined, which is a timestamp. That is a date. And this might remind you a little bit of TypeScript. And yeah, SQL in a way is typed, right? Before we can start assigning IDs and names and emails, we have to tell it what type it accepts. And this is how databases work to optimize their queries and just overall have the good performance that databases have. So let's run this query. If I refresh now, I have the users table. That's amazing. And we can create the login table as well. Again, same thing, ID, hash, and email. If I run this query and refresh, all right, I have the login and users table. Awesome. So there's my database running. Theoretically, our app should work now. Let's go back to our connection over here. And instead of database, and it looks like we don't need a user because we haven't set a user. And we're using, again, localhost here. I'm going to say SmartBrain1. I'm going to save. We've restarted our server. Let's try this again. I'm going to go back to our app. Let's try this again. I'm going to register. All right. We've just logged into our app. If I go back to my database and I refresh here, look at that. I have hey@gmail.com, 0 entries, a timestamp of when I joined, and I even have a hashed password with the email. That is very, very cool. So we should be able to now work with this app, right? Let's close the console, and looks like this Magic Brain will detect faces in the picture. Give it a try. We can enter a URL here to detect faces. So I have some face here that I can use. I'm going to say copy image address, which gives me the URL. And I'm going to paste it in here and click detect. All right, look at that. Our entries count went up by 1. And I can check this by going to the users. And we see that, yeah, entries is now 1, so database has been updated. And if I go back to the server, all right, no errors. All right, and where is this face detection feature? We don't really see it, do we? If I open up the console, I see that, now we have another 400 error, a bad request. And I see that it's at the endpoint image URL. So something with the image URL isn't working. It just says cannot get image URL. If I open up the network tab and try this again, we see that, yeah, the image URL, there's something wrong here. We have a 400 request, and it says unable to work with API. All right, sounds like we have one more piece of the puzzle that we need to fix. And that is we're using an API called Clarifai. And Clarifai is an API that allows us to send a URL of the picture and they return a response for us. So if I go into developers, documentation, and I go into, let's see, predict, we see that via URL, we can predict things. What can we do? It looks like we need an API key. And with any APIs you work with, you need something called an API key because this is how the API knows, oh yeah, this is Andre. He's already paid for our services or he has 1,000 free images that he can send to us. And by the way, Clarifai is free for the entry level. So don't worry, this is something that you get out of the box for free. So we need an API key. The best thing I can do is go back to my API and perhaps search for API. Let's just say API for now. And that's not what we want to do. We want to do a full-on search. Let's say API. And if I keep scrolling down, I see, oh yeah, here's my API key for Clarifai. And yes, I'm showing you my API key. And don't worry, by the time you see this video, I would have changed this so you don't have access to it. This is one of those things where that is a secret. You shouldn't show to anybody. You should never put it into production. When you push this into GitHub, you need to do something like your API key here so that people don't see your API key. Because most of the times, API keys, well, they're valuable. You either pay money for them or you have rate limits and you can only use the service 1,000 times. And if I was a bad person, I can just steal this and just use up all your Clarifai data. Again, don't worry, I'll change this by now, by the time you see this, so you can't use it. But I've entered my Clarifai key in the image.js, which exists over here. All right. Again, on most projects, this is something that developers will already tell you or they're in the documentation. So you don't have to go find this out yourself. But for those of you that, again, haven't been part of my previous course and haven't worked with Clarifai, all you need to do is create an account, and it's completely free. And you can just say, create new application, click on your application, and it has the API keys over here. And the API keys are going to be generated for you, and you can just copy this. Or you can go to API keys over here and click on create new API key. And it looks like this is my API key. If I go back, you can see that it's actually different than the older one, which doesn't work anymore. So I just copy and pasted this, saved it, and now let's go back to our app. All right, let's close this and try this again. I'm going to click detect. Let's go back here. All right, so that's not working. I'm still getting the image URL bad request. And here's the thing. As a developer, there's always silly mistakes here and there that we think, oh, like there's something definitely wrong with the setup. What am I doing wrong? And it's just one of those things that you have to test all your assumptions. And you'll realize that sometimes you're just making a silly mistake. And you think about it logically. Okay, the code that I just received was working because other developers are working on it. And we did a special case where we modified the API key, which most likely you won't. I just wanted to show you how to do that in case you need to set that up yourself. But we wouldn't want to change too much of this code because this code is hypothetically already in production. So there's something that we're doing wrong. We've entered the API key, our connection to the database exists, our entries are being updated. So the only thing that logically makes sense is something to do with this. And if you actually take a look at this message, it is not a URL. Not at all. If you go to the very beginning, let's see. We see that it's a base64 image, which again is another way of getting images, but it's not a URL, which is what we expect here. So you have to be careful with that because Google removed the view image tab from here, so it's hard to get a URL. I've added it here because I have a Chrome plugin that does it. So let's pick a different image that actually has a URL. I'm going to copy this, copy image address, go back to our app. All right, that looks like a URL with .jpg. I'm going to click detect. Look at that. We have face detection working for our app. And there you have it. We have our setup and everything is working. If we go to the console, let's clear this and try again. Let's try a different picture this time. We'll try this one. I'm going to say copy image address. Make sure it's a URL. It's not, it's base64. Let's try a different one. Let's try this one. Copy image address. It's a JPEG, that's good. I click. All right, no errors in the console. Our entry count has increased and it detects the faces. All right, very cool. So we have everything set up. If we go back to our server and then go to our app, there's no errors, everything is working, everything is set up. And that's when we start to actually look at the code and analyze things. Once we set up everything so things are working, we know that this is what we need, we can start looking at the code now and figuring out what to do, what we can't do. By the way, a quick side note. For Postgres, another way you can access the database is, again, through the psql command. Again, this is something that might come with your brew install of Postgres, or you might have to do something different depending on your machine. But I do Postgres, and you want the username and password, the local host, in our case, the port number that you remember we default created the Postgres SQL with. And then we have our SmartBrain app. So if I do SmartBrain 1 here, and we don't have username and password, so let's just leave it at that. Let's see if it works without username and password. Look at that. I'm connected to the database. And here I can use some common commands like /d, which gives me all the tables that I have available. And I can run SQL commands here like select star from users. And I see that hey@gmail.com is also working. Again, something that we covered in my previous course, but at least now you know that that's what we're doing with our graphical user interface. We're just connecting to this database and accessing it, but in a more friendlier, easier to use fashion. All right, so this is working. In the next video, we're gonna start looking at the code and seeing how we can implement multiple face detection. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.